Okay, good day to all of our viewers and listeners out there. Welcome, all you curious, kind, lovely people. Welcome back to another interview of your content creator with Ancient Mysteries Unearthed. I'm Brandon James Sim. I'll be interviewing the great Chris Noble. Yes, thank you so much for having me on again for a third episode. The last one we did was Antarctica. Antarctica is a really tough one to get into without getting to all this stuff that I think a lot of people get uncomfortable with, because the rumors and the whispers it gets off the rails, and that's what's just so interesting about it. But we're going to bring it back to something that's a little more grounded, and by grounded I mean literally working with stones here. Chris, you have spent a good chunk of time researching Egypt. You even went there. You studied with a great Egyptologist who was not a British guy operating out of Oxford, making outlandish claims without being boots on the ground and really studying it. This gentleman, he was Egyptian, no?
Correct. It's Mohamed Ibrahim from Egypt. I believe he's from Memphis, Egypt specifically. And he was our guide. And the tour was really spearheaded by Dr. Robert Schoch, who is the geologist that famously in the 90s redated the Great Sphinx using hardcore, irrefutable geological evidence. And it sent the Egyptological community into an uproar. And it has not recovered ever since. They still deny the theory, even though it's based off of the most fundamental hardcore evidence you could ever ask for, which is geology. And we can get into that today. It was quite a trip, and I really learned a lot. It solidified a lot of research I had done previously, and it also brought so many more questions and absolutely incredible possibilities to the surface. So
to all of our listeners, I, as the interviewer here, I represent you. I am the amateur. I am the curiosity. I am the fanatic. I am the fan. I hear things about ancient Egypt. Like I said, I studied history. I know kind of the stories that exist, that I was taught mainstream. But to tell you the truth, like Egypt, even in high school, we brushed over Egypt to rush to Greece. And I think the reason is because the Greeks have a better understanding of their ancient history than the Egyptians seem to. It seems that even to Egyptians, there's a good deal of ancient mysteries that need to be unearthed. I know that desert seems to be holding more secrets, and we dig up more and more artifacts. We see so many anomalies coming out of Egypt, which to me seems like the answer is that we're pushing those dates back and back and back and back. And I'm not taking anything away from the Egyptian people. Obviously, they hold some sacred ancestry there. I'm just curious, Chris, how old do you think the pyramids of Egypt are?
That's a big question because, well, one thing is with Egypt, we know that it's been conquered by at least 9 or 10 different major nations, civilizations over the course of the more recent history in Egypt. So, who were the Egyptians is the big question, because we're talking, well, what group of people were empowered during the time of these creations, of these structures, right? And the big question we got asked with Egypt and everywhere else in the world, including where I am right now, which is Mexico and with the Mayans, is, did these people build these structures, or did they inherit these structures and perhaps add some things, do some restoration, make some additions, But who were the original builders? And that's obviously going into what your question is, who built the original pyramids? Well, the quick answer is we have no idea. We have absolutely no idea who built these. And it certainly was not the pharaohs that are mentioned throughout history, whether it was Khufu or other pharaohs that are brought up in history that were supposedly the original builders. We know that that's not the case because these structures are, one, far too sophisticated for the time of those pharaohs. Those pharaohs were dealing with more primitive technologies. We're talking copper chisels and tools, right? Copper goes, okay, so one of the big things we got to look at right now when we're talking about ancient structures is the Mohs scale of hardness. This is a scale that shows the density and the hardness of a particular mineral or rock. So copper is around a 3 out of 10 on this scale of hardness. The pyramids, and specifically the Great Pyramid of Giza, is built out of granite, okay? Quartz granite. That's around a 7, 7.5, maybe even an 8 in hardness. Diamonds are like a 9, right? So this is one of the hardest structures, hardest, densest piece of stone. And they built with the most incredible precision, which I'll get into in a second, that we can't even do today. And I've seen interviews with modern architects who have designed huge bridges and pretty fantastic structures. And they look at the Great Pyramid and they scratch their head and they really don't know. They're like, look, we could probably do it today, but we wouldn't build with those materials. We would build with lighter materials. These were 2 to 50 to 100 ton weighing blocks of granite that they cut and they put together with quite literal laser precision. You can't fit a piece of paper in between these things. And they perfectly aligned it to north-south, to the cardinal directions, and to true north, magnetic north. And they also quarried that granite rock was quarried 1,000 kilometers away south, just down on the Nile River in a place called Aswan and other places around that. 1,000 kilometers to bring this particular type of granite all the way up to what we now know as Cairo and the Giza Plateau, and then proceed to build arguably the most sophisticated structure that still exists on this planet today. It's the original ancient wonder of the world. It's the only one left. And yet it's still to this day something that the modern architects look at and they scratch their heads. Like when I was in Egypt, I was also with engineers and architects. You know, I'm not. I'm I'm a musician and a filmmaker. Okay, I don't have these credentials. So when I'm around other people that do, I listen very, very carefully. And they talked a lot on this trip about the impossibility of how we would even make these things today, let alone with the supposed primitive technology of the ancient Egyptians. It just can't be done. So the ancient Egyptians, as we know them, very likely did not build these pyramids. They inherited these pyramids. From how long ago? We don't know. What we can say, like I mentioned at the beginning, is that one of the structures right beside the Great Pyramid is the Great Sphinx. And Dr. Robert Schoch has redated it using geology, which has been backed up and fortified by many, many other geologists. It's irrefutable. It's water weathering. It's so simple. It's so basic when you really think about it and start to look at it. It's actually really simple evidence, but it shows that the Great Sphinx goes back to at least, well, conservatively, he says 9 to 10,000 years ago, but when I asked him, and you ask any other geologist that looks at this water weathering, they're like, wow, it's a minimum of 20, 25, perhaps 30, 35,000 years. And that actually coincides with the astronomical alignments of the Sphinx being in the constellation of Leo, facing that constellation. The last time that was possible was either, I believe, 12,000 years ago or 36,000 years ago. And 12,000 years ago, the Earth was being just smashed with cataclysms. So it's very unlikely that they're building any kind of structure at that time. Everything was getting dismantled at that time. So if it wasn't done 12,000 years ago, approximately, then the next time in that cycle for everything to be facing the constellation of Leo for the Great Sphinx was 36,000 years ago, approximately. And there's lots of other evidence to support that that's how old that could be. So therefore, the Great Pyramid could very well be in that ballpark of tens of thousands of years old. The last thing I'll say about it too is the complexity of this design. So the Great Pyramid of Giza is also built at what's called the geocentric center of the planet. That means it's at the center of Earth's land mass. The only way that you can even know where the geocentric center of the planet is when you have a north-south orbiting satellite system that can measure and mark these things. That's the first time in recent history that we were able to find the geocentric center of the planet, of the center of Earth's landmass, all put together. Where's the center of it? Boom, it's right on the Giza Plateau, right where the Great Pyramids are. They also align perfectly to the constellation of Orion. You juxtapose and overlay the constellation of Orion on top of those three pyramids on the Giza Plateau, perfect alignment. And it just so happens that the ancient Egyptians talk a lot about the star system of Orion, where the gods come from and where they have a lot of affinity and a lot of worship and a lot of meaning put to those places. I'll let your imaginations take that where you want to. Right now, I'll stick to just some more hardcore facts. For example, they find mathematical equations throughout this pyramid all over the place, including the mathematical ratios of pi and phi. Pi is the 3.14 ratio. Phi, PHI, is basically the mathematics of organic growth. It's the mathematics of the Fibonacci sequence, the spiral galaxies, the spiral vortexes you see when you flush a toilet, or when you see a tornado, or when you see the center of a flower, or a million other examples of this, micro and macro versions of this type of mathematics we see all throughout nature. It's all over the Great Pyramid of Giza. There's also so many more things. Like I said, these blocks that make up the Great Pyramid are put together with a precision of 1/100th of an inch. Just so you know, when we're building in this day and age, I can't remember specifically because there was another architect talking about this because this is their area of expertise, but it's essentially our area of error when it comes to construction is greater, meaning we have more room for error in modern construction than the error that was basically observed on the Great Pyramid of Giza. 1/100th of an inch. I mean, that's insane precision. You can't do that with slaves throwing blocks together. It just doesn't work like that with copper chisel. Impossible, absolutely impossible. Another crazy thing, this pyramid was already hard enough to build as it was, supposedly in 20 years, which is utterly incredible. But it's also 8-sided. It's not a 4-sided pyramid. It's 8-sided. There was a photograph taken, I think, by the military in the 50s or 60s at one of the equinoxes. And of course, they align perfectly to these spring and fall equinoxes, summer and winter solstices, like a lot of ancient sites do. And they found with the sun casting a shadow on the Great Pyramid that it showed that there was actually a small indentation on each side of it, meaning that it was slightly indented, pushed in ever so slightly, but you could see it with the shadow. And then they therefore concluded, oh my God, it's 8-sided. It's not 4, it's 8. And talking to architects and engineers, that increases the level of difficulty to build this thing exponentially. It was already almost impossible as it was. Now it's 8-sided. Forget about it. Like, unbelievable precision and like literal mystery of how in the hell they built this thing. And of course, it stands the test of time. If it is the tens of thousands of years old that we think it is, it's still here. How? It's earthquake proof, basically. I mean, it's not in its finished state. It's missing its entire outer casing. You can imagine what that pyramid would have looked like. It was actually white form of granite that would have shined and reflected light so bright like a star, and with a golden capstone at the top, would have looked unbelievably spectacular. But now we have it in a ruined state and it's still spectacular. So there are so many anomalies with this thing. I could go into more, but this is like you said, today's episode, we've really got grounded evidence to support and show that Egypt and a lot of its anomalous structures and artifacts are a great place to start this journey of curiosity because there's so much there.
Well, so getting into these structures, and Egypt is, like I said, even the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, when I studied history, they're like, okay, there was Egypt, but society, Western society started with the Greeks, and the Greeks were like, what is going on with Egypt? You know, like, we all want to know what's going on with Egypt. They would go to Egypt and people would study, and they would study these, ruins, and they were ruins. They were ruins. There's an Arab proverb that I believe it roughly says, man fears time, time fears the pyramids. Now, of course, when I say the pyramids, I believe there are some smaller step periods built with smaller stones that are dated earlier or more recent, I guess is a way to say, that might have been us humans. When I say humans, I'm not saying that it's necessarily an alien intervention to build the pyramids, although there is a train of thought that people say that. But there's a modern replica that we're trying to produce, and they're probably not, from my understanding, as amazing. They don't hold that sacred geometry, those mathematical equations that, how can you refute math? Math is, they say, the language of the universe. It is the thing that, 2 plus 2 does equal 4. There is the term for pi. We are always learning and we're always discovering new things and growing. But this, if I was to leave something for another civilization, using English or Latin might not be the best way to do it, but using math built into the architecture is something that somebody from the future in China, someone in the future in the Congo, someone in the future of Mexico, if they were a brilliant mind in studying this, and they might say, there's something here. It's so interesting. So the way I look at this, and when I'm hearing you talk, there seems to be, so there's the math involved. Then there's the geography as to where these sites are placed. And then there's this cultural phenomenon that we have as well, where it seems to be that we cherry pick our conception of history, and we are so limited by our conception of history, in my personal view. And I think this is where the mainstream starts to kind of bully, when they say you're not allowed to question, you're not allowed to wonder. Graham Hancock's beautiful documentary on Netflix, which is trending right now, I see a lot of pushback on this, and people are calling it dangerous information. And if you believe in what he's saying here, what else are you susceptible to believe in? And I don't know why there's this attack on curiosity. I call it curiosity. There's people dedicating their lives to this information. Listeners like us, content creators like Chris here, who are just posing discussions. And, Chris is a prime example of what a lot of us wish we were, not sitting on our couch, not sitting in bed, listening to this discussion as we drift off to sleep or have some downtime. But he's in Mexico right now. Of course, probably planning to launch a new expedition to some of these ancient sites with locals from the region, with information that isn't celebrated. And I don't know why it's not celebrated. I mean, I look at the modern and the ancient and how they converge, and how a lot of them, when that happens, it's uncomfortable to a lot of people. Namely, we start to see, we can have a pretty accurate representation of the star systems in the world and press play over thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years and watch how they move. Because we have to remember, much like our Earth is revolving around the sun, we have seasons. Our sun is revolving around something. Our solar system is revolving around something else. Our galaxy is revolving around something else. The ancients talk about the universe being in motion, and so these stars are tracking across, and we're going through probably celestial seasons as well, which, we hear about climate change, and I'm not a climate denier. Obviously, our pollution of the earth is going to have ramifications to us, but Mother Gaia is a pretty resilient being, and I think she'll be here long after us. But we don't know. We've seen cataclysms happen before that have left perhaps evidence on things like the Sphinx. So we start to play Clue with these, and you hear about, even the History Channel, they talk about the Sphinx is probably 4,000 to 4,500 years old. However, there's new theories that suggest that rain damage on the Sphinx, which they're really talking about water damage on these structures, suggesting perhaps pushing it back further towards the floods or to a different climate change event that happened in our past. But when we see the stars moving, I've seen a lot of people, I know it aligns with Orion, but when we push it back, we almost start to see it line up right above it, and it pushes it back further and further. And the Nile as well seems to have moved. And the Nile, I believe, used to be a lot closer. And then you start to hear people ask the question, what was the Great Pyramid's intention? Today we see Giza, and we see the city has encroached right up to it. Of course, we're amazed by it. We're in wonder. We're in awe. We want to be close to it. It's a money generating thing now for tourism. I want to go see the pyramids. Chris has gone and seen the pyramids. But back in the day, I don't know if there's much evidence to suggest that the cities, the structures were right there. I'm not sure. But we do kind of know that the Nile was close to there. So was there a purpose to the pyramid that was, we kind of know it's not a tomb. I get into discussions now, arguments with people who still believe it's a tomb. But once again, I ask, where is the evidence of it being a tomb? And is there evidence of it being used for different purposes?
Yeah, the Great Pyramid, anyone that says it was a tomb, where's the body? Never, ever has there been any mummy, anything like that found. When you go to actual burial sites like the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, it's very obvious that there are pharaohs and other high-ranking individuals buried there. Their sarcophaguses are massive. They have hieroglyphs everywhere. It's decorated. Of course it is. It's a pharaoh. It's a king, a queen, a high-ranking person. They always do this throughout history. We see this all the time. Why is none of that in the Great Pyramid? You go inside the Great Pyramid, first of all, there's no doorway or entranceway. The side of the Great Pyramid that all of the tourists, myself included, walked through was blown open back in, I believe, I don't even know, the 1800s or sometime, with dynamite. So you couldn't get in there. There's a lot of speculation and pretty interesting speculation that's based off of some solid evidence that shows there's a whole underground passageway and series of tunnels under the Great Pyramid. That's indisputable. And then, of course, there's the more other theories that come out of that, which is there's a complete underground city under that. And by city, I mean just a massive establishment of underground, let's say cavities, rooms, places that maybe house the Hall of Records that everyone talks about, and so on and so forth. They did do, Dr. Robert Schoch himself did some more primitive but very effective ground penetrating radar using a hammer and a metal. It's not ground penetrating radar, excuse me. It's sonar, type of sonar, and using vibration to just find if there are open cavities in the ground. And he did find, using just literally a hammer hitting a metal plate on the ground, and then using, I think, a seismograph or some form of measurement to measure the vibrations that come back. And this was done back in the 90s. And they found that there were cavities, there were holes and spaces under the Great Sphinx that would absolutely link up to the Great Pyramid. So, these were all interconnected, and these were far, far, far more sophisticated back in their antiquity. So what do we know? Well, we know that the Nile definitely has migrated geographically, and in terms of the geology of it, that takes a solid amount of time for a river to migrate. But when we're going back into these theories of perhaps the pyramids in that part of Egypt were 36,000 years old or even older, well, then that starts to actually make sense with the geology of the Nile. And yeah, why wouldn't they build right beside the Nile? That's where they build now in Egypt. Most of the major sites are really interesting. If you look at a map on all the ancient sites in Egypt, they're not right beside the Nile, but they mimic the shape of the Nile. When you look at them, it looks like they're just about 9 kilometers or less away from the Nile, but mimicking the shape. So just kind of parallel to it in the same shape as the Nile. So it's not a very crazy thought to think that they would have been right beside the Nile for multiple reasons. Well, one of the big ones is to draw energy. And I think that the Great Pyramid and other pyramids as well were definitely used as ancient energy generation devices. What kind of energy? Well, Nikola Tesla definitely had a good idea about what that was, because he based his Wardenclyffe Tower technology off of the Great Pyramid. And what is that? Well, it's essentially, and I'm not a scientist, so I'll do the best I can to explain this, is all of these ancient sites, so many of them are built over aquifers or cenotes, or basically an area where there is running water underground. This happens time and time again. I'm witnessing it a lot here in Mexico. It's all over the world. They do this all the time. Why? One of the theories is that you can draw energy from moving water, specifically electricity. Now, granted, it's not maybe the strongest charge you get from it, but you certainly can generate a charge from moving water. Now, when you build a certain geometric shape above running water underneath, known as an aquifer or cenote, then another really interesting phenomenon happens. And this is what Nikola Tesla was doing, which is that he could tap into the energy of the ionosphere of the Earth, meaning what the electromagnetism and other, I guess, phenomenon that I don't quite understand that happens in our ionosphere, in the atmosphere of the planet. And it's able to draw in almost like how lightning bolts, start from the ground and move up. They are tapping into the same electrical sort of stream of energy that connects from the grounding of the Earth to the electrically charged ionosphere of the planet way up in the sky there. So what the Great Pyramid and Tesla's tower were both doing was they create a bridge, almost a focal point of an energy, let's say, generating sort of middle, like in between the two, where it uses the ground of the Earth right there, and then the running water underneath to act as like maybe a battery or some form of like ground charge, and then link it up to the ionosphere of the Earth and create almost like a channel of infinite, non-evasive energy. Basically, it's clean, free, and almost unlimited, if not completely unlimited energy, and it's wireless. You can transmit that wirelessly, as Tesla showed and proved. So that's why I think my main theory for what the Great Pyramid was used for. However, there are, I think, and I honestly believe this with a lot of the ancients, especially the more sophisticated technology of the ancients, I believe it was multi-purpose. And so outside of just generating energy, I also think that these devices or these sites like the Great Pyramid were also used to do some pretty spectacular things that are going to start to sound like a science fiction film. But I really do believe in this. And one of them is that it can create portals. It can actually generate enough energy and focus enough of this energy to recreate like little mini black holes, just like we're kind of doing a little bit right now with CERN and those particle colliders there's about 3 of them, I think, on the Earth right now, at least that are public knowledge. And so I think that in the past, and the movie Stargate is a really, really interesting film to watch.
Drip, drip.
Drip, drip, drip. I mean, we see this all the time in Hollywood. We could go on a lot about the amount of truth that gets exposed through fiction, and specifically science fiction. So watch the movie Stargate to kind of understand what I'm talking about here. But basically, the Great Pyramid can focus in so much amounts of energy that why couldn't it create a little mini portal, perhaps inside the pyramid, that selective elites or whoever were able to go in and travel to different places. Now, the last thing I'll say with that is the common, I guess, idea for why all these ancient sites were aligned to to astronomical alignments to different stars and constellations. Oh, it's because, they love to worship the stars and the gods and the stars. And it's always, kind of belittled into a worship. And sure, it probably became that at some point, and maybe it had aspects of that. But I also think, why would they spend so much time and money and complexity to align these sites to these specific constellations, stars, star clusters, etc.? Well, what if they were able to generate so much energy there that they could create a Stargate? Well, maybe the alignment of that particular site, let's say like the Great Pyramid and the Orion constellation as an example, or the star Sirius, which one of its shafts aligns perfectly with the star Sirius. What if they were able to somehow, through the alignment, focus in that portal technology, and that's the destination? So they would create that Stargate, that portal in the Great Pyramid, and then because of the alignment to, let's say, the Orion star cluster or the Orion constellation, then that's the destination. So the alignment shows the destination, and then the actual construction, the geometry and the placement of this creates the energy. And perhaps it only opens up at certain times of year, which then brings in, well, why would they align to this winter solstice, the summer solstice, the spring equinox, the fall equinox, outside of the obvious agricultural and, Very obvious reasons as to why they would do that, to remember where they are in the calendar. Sure, I'm not disputing that. As well as that, though, perhaps those were the times of year that that portal would open, that Stargate would open at that particular time. So that's why you would align it to that, so that one, you're at the right time, the two, you've aligned it to the right destination, and then three, you're creating enough energy to then open up that ripple in space-time and either travel yourself there, or, and this is what's really interesting, or other beings travel here. And we hear so many cultures worldwide talk about gods with a small g, not the big God that created everything. We're talking small gods. Well, what would we think is a small god? And a being that is beyond our advancement, that can create things that we've never even dreamed of. That's basically a god. So the ancients were really just creating, perhaps, maybe not, we're creating pathways, traveling stargates, abilities for these gods to come back and visit, to give their wisdom, to give their knowledge that benefited humanity, at least at certain points of history. There's also a lot of accounts where it wasn't so good for humanity and the gods, and that's a whole other story.
Oh yeah, look at the Veda texts. A lot of war all of a sudden, you know.
Sumerians too, right? The Anunnaki didn't seem too nice either.
Well, Chris, so this is, oh man, I thought we were going to keep it grounded. Now we're in space and portals.
I can't help it. Though. I can't, because that's for me a really newer part of the research. And it's, to me, it's like, you know, those things where, and this is what Ancient Mysteries Unearthed is all about. Like, I don't want people to feel like they have to be filtered on here. I'm certainly not. And I'm happy to be proven wrong. All of those brilliant scientists out there that, like, Chris, that is complete lunacy. I'm like, let's talk about it. And I'm so happy to be wrong.
Well, and you know what, as far as I go, I'm just a fan of great stories and great knowledge. So, I mean, to all my future employers out there, you know, don't think I'm wearing a tinfoil hat. I study scripts for a living. You know, we don't talk, the script of everything going the way it's supposed to be is boring. The Rock is not starring in that film. He's starring in Ancient Portals, beaming beings here who he's got to kick their butt. So that's where I come in. It's just so much more entertaining, this view, and the fact that there is evidence to perhaps suggest this literally engraved in stone and just printed on the earth. I mean, it's incredible.
Sorry, Brandon.
Please.
Wait, you've just got me thinking of one last thing that people can check out right here, right now on my YouTube channel, Ancient Mysteries Unearthed. I do have some videos, and lots more are going to be coming in 2023, but some videos that are already up there where I'm showing extremely sophisticated cut marks right by the Giza Plateau near the Great Pyramid of just other forms of granite rock, where it looks like a modern day blade cut through this rock just like we would now. And this is ancient, and all the people recognize that these rocks are extremely, extremely old, yet you have these perfect, straight machine cuts. And this is just one of, I'm talking thousands of examples, just in Egypt alone, of, forget my Stargate stuff. This is tangible, physical evidence that asks the question, who the hell did this? How did they do this? And the given theories that exist right now don't cut it, pun intended. Like, they don't make any sense, because these things are very, very advanced and require tools. Christopher Dunn, great book, The Giza Power Plant. Check that one out. He talks about, he's a master engineer, and he looks at the Great Pyramid and the Giza Plateau and says, and he sees signs of tools. He's like, the only way you get this is from a saw, or from some sort of a saw, maybe a sonic sound frequency-based saw. I don't know, but either way, it's got to be cut by something other than a copper chisel, which is what the academics will say they did it with somehow. And so I'm saying to those listening, there is so much grounded evidence, not just the crazy, Stargate stuff, which still has actually a decent amount of evidence. You can find hieroglyphic evidence of Stargates. Another video I have on my channel talks about that in Egypt, but they literally spell it out for you, Stargate. They literally say this in hieroglyphics in quite a few different sites in Egypt. So that's another fascinating piece of evidence.
Well, we're going to have to do a whole episode on Stargates, because this is supposed to be about being grounded, and literally you took us off planet.
Yeah, well, this is what happens, folks, when you get Brandon and Chris together talking about mysteries.
Okay. All right. I'm going to reel you back here. We're running out of time. I still got to plug the channel. So I want to know, There's these giant colossus statues in Egypt, and they're just so impressive and they're massive. Be honest with me, they look so similar. How close in precision are those? And like, I wonder today, and I'm going to preface with this too, AI is getting incredible right now. It's scaring the poopy doopy out of me. And I wonder, are we now getting to a time now with AI and that technology where we can actually reproduce this stuff? These things look like they're 3D printed. How close are these? I know you studied them. How close? There's like tons of these statues. How close are they to each other?
Well, yeah, these statues are the colossi specifically are they've been moved several times, which is already a question. Like ancient times, they've been moved. Where these are megalithic, thousands of tons in terms of weight, about 30 feet tall at least, and they are carved to precision. Once again, now they're broken up into several blocks. Mostly because I think they've been destroyed and kind of rebuilt from, we're talking ancient times. So that's a tough one to say. Lots of statues. What I will say is really, really curious. Another thing Christopher Dunn discovered is that there's a lot of these statues throughout Egypt, including in Luxor, where it shows, like you were saying, almost a 3D print of the same little sphinx or the same face of Hathor is another example where it's perfectly symmetrical on each side, and each side is constructed perfectly. And then there's like 50 other versions of that. You can't do that when you have a team of individuals, copper chisels, manually trying to carve these things out. You don't do that. You do that in an assembly line in a freaking factory where you're either 3D printing it or you have advanced machines that are using a computer with a CAD file that then allows you to design the same thing over and over and over. So a lot of the statues are also in a way like factory or 3D printed somehow because they're done with at least computer technology. It's the only way you could ever do that, at least to our knowledge.
It brings us back to this idea that we have these puzzle pieces and we're just jamming them into the wrong parts. You know how you did when you were a kid and you were frustrated and you didn't want to, you're building that one picture and you're just like, no, this has got to fit. And it doesn't. And I don't know if it's that we can only see through our lens, and it's a completely different lens we should be looking through. Like you said, is it sound technology? What technology did they have? Were they so psychic that they could do these amazing things? Or are we rediscovering ancient technology today that is going to unlock more mysteries? And that's what we're going to get into next time, is talking about maybe the parallels of the ancient technology. Was it more advanced or less advanced than what we have today? And are we just on the cusp of being able to do some of this ourselves? So thank you so much for listening, everyone, to a beautiful talk about the pyramids and some anomalies in Egypt. There's going to be more and more and more episodes of this. It just keeps going on. Smash that like button, smash that subscribe button. Chris, thanks for having us in. Just so you guys know, you can become exclusive members to Ancient Mysteries Unearthed for only 33 cents a day. That brings you into a huge web of content. You're going to be live streamed with Chris when he's on these ancient sites. You're going to be getting so much great stuff through a community, uncensored, unapologetic, and just, I'm going to leave this again by saying, stay kind, stay curious. Thank you so much, Chris, for having us in tonight.
Thanks, Brandon. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Ciao, everyone.